from ProACT Partnership Living and Working Abroad Club. We're here to quickly give you an insight into what are your residency options after EU Brexit. On the 15th of November, Brexit was confirmed, and it's now set in stone to occur by the 29th of March 2019. With 3 million EU expats living in the UK and 1 million British expats living in the EU, there's quite a lot of people affected by this and whose status has been confirmed to a large degree in the first agreement that was made on the 15th of November. So what we want to do in this live webinar today is confirm and outline what the situation is for expats within the EU, and also look to expand upon what the options are for people that are living in the EU or in the UK as expats post-Brexit. The world of expats didn't start or end with Brexit. There are many non-EU citizens living within the EU countries, within America, Australia, and Canada, and they have an immigration process. There is an immigration process within the EU, in the UK, in Cyprus, and in other countries. It's just that it's different within the EU, that you can freely travel in the same way that you can travel when you're in the States between Florida and California, separate states within one federated country. So this is what we want to look at. In the UK, there's some quite ancient rights which do apply. There is actually a UK ancestry visa where if your grandparents are from the UK and were born in the UK and you live in the Commonwealth, you can still get a right to come and live and work in the UK. The same as if you've got UK parents, you can migrate over. Once you've been in the UK for 5 years, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain. It's a real mouthful at the moment, and thank goodness it's changing to a term called a settled status, which you can acquire after 5 years in the UK. Before that, everything will be known as a temporary residency visa. At the moment, an EU citizen moving to the UK doesn't need any documentation at all. They do not need to register for any identity documents. The UK don't have an identity system, unlike most EU countries. If you go to the USA and invest $1 million and employ 10 people, you can get a similar right to stay in the USA. In Canada, if you've got a job offer and you've got an appropriate skill that you can show, then you can get to live and work in Canada as well. In Australia, it's a bit more difficult at the moment, where they are looking for special skills, and if you meet a narrowly defined specialist skill, or you've got a successful business, they may sponsor you to come and live and work in Australia. In a country like Cyprus, they love expats, and if you've got an income for a family over €1,200 a month, either from a job offer within the country or from a business that you create, then you can get a residency permit, whether you're from the EU or from without the EU. We've also got a scheme where from more than 2 million invested in Cyprus in property or business can help you acquire a fast track to citizenship and a Cyprus passport. So these options are quite extensive, and in the agreements on the 15th of December, they confirmed that the rights of residency and remains to stay will be extended for at least 2 years beyond Brexit. So until March 2021, any expat in the UK has still got a right to remain where they are within the EU. Noting what I said earlier, that the English have actually gone a bit further than that. And they'll also have the right still to get any healthcare or pension benefits if they qualify them, depending upon the local country's rules. So let's have a look at what the situation is after Brexit at the moment. As far as the EU are concerned, there'll be no change to any expat status in the UK. So any EU citizen who's living and working in the UK on Brexit date, the 29th of March, will continue to be able to live and work there. This right will probably be extended to EEA citizens as well. What that means is people from who are half in Europe, the EU and half not, which includes Switzerland, Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. If they've settled in the EU before the 29th of March, if they've settled in the UK before the 29th of March, those people who have got this right to remain in the UK for as long as they like can then also apply for a settled status once they've been in the UK for 5 years. So you're in the EU, you're in the UK as an EU citizen, as long as you continue to qualify for your temporary resident status, you won't be removed from the UK. And once you've been there 5 years, you're going to apply for settled status. So if you're living and working or with your spouse in the UK and you've been there for 5 years, there'll be, in effect, you'll be able to confirm a settled status at that time. And bring with you to that country dependent children, parents, grandchildren, dependent grandparents, and spouse at a later date, even if they join you after the 29th of March. But you must apply for this settled status, and otherwise the temporary resident permit would need to be continued to be renewed, and you'd be under renewed scrutiny every few years within that. For the EU, it's slightly different. So within the EU, UK citizens can stay with their families, but each of the 27 remaining EU countries may require that you transfer from the EU yellow slip residency permits that are issued when people move to a country during the 2-year transition period into a more permanent residency visa. But again, the right to stay should be indefinite at the moment. And the good thing for British people is that if you've acquired that right to live and work in the other EU country before the 29th of March 2019, you can then be absent from that country, such as Cyprus, for up to 5 years as well, and still retain the right to live and work in that country. So people that are taking contracts to work in Africa or the Middle East or Asia for 1, 2, 3, 5 years at a time can move away and then come back to their overseas property that they own in Cyprus, even after 4.5 years. The same transition period applies for the EU as it does for EU countries as it does for the UK, where there's a transition period up to 2 years where this status might be changed. And the statuses that exist are quite clear. So what are your residency options? So at the moment, EU citizens within the EU are shepherded in that they've got the EU freedoms behind them, that they've got the right to live and work and move their capital and business and services around the EU. Some countries require a registration for the EU citizens, like Cyprus, for example. Other countries don't require that. The UK don't have an ID system, and you can freely move into the UK. So those access to healthcare and pensions and medicals are transferred between the member states, and they're going to still exist for people within the EU. So if you're an EU citizen, or if you've got a dual citizenship, you're going to retain that freedom. So this is a question of where you look for some Irish ancestry, or you acquire a citizenship of another country. The first type of visa is a travel visa. So this nonsense about travel being eroded is just that. It's nonsense. There's an international convention beyond the EU that allows for travel visas where most people can travel freely to another country for up to 3 months. Yes, countries require visas for visits for those period, but it's still issued for up to 3 months under a travel visa international protocols. And that will still allow any British or EU citizen to travel to any country on holiday or on stag weekends, hen party weekends, or golfing weekends in Spain or Portugal or Cyprus. For those that want to stay beyond that and live and work in another country, then they will require a residency visa, not for EU citizens in an EU country. But if you're not from the EU, if you're Russian moving to Cyprus, Iranian moving to the UK, Canadian working in London, a French person migrating to Cyprus, then you would need, so that'd be wrong, but you will need a residency visa if you're moving from Canada or USA into another country. And the initial visa, how long it's issued for, depends upon the local laws. But generally around the world and within the EU countries, the situation is that the visas will be issued for between 6 months or a year, or the length of an employment contract, and then would need to be renewed at the end of that period. So this can be quite a bit of horse trading for an expat, but it's a necessary function and allows the authorities to connect with and check on healthcare, if private healthcare is still in place, if taxes are being paid, if employment is being secured. Once you've been in an EU country for 5 years, you can acquire a permanent residency. Now, a permanent residency is EU legislation. So if you've lived and worked in any EU country for 5 years, or you have the right to live in that country for 5 years, then after that time, you can acquire permanent residency, which allows you to freely move in and out of that EU country without a need to keep renewing your residency visa and your work permits during that 10-year period. So this is useful for Asians, Middle East, American, North American, and Russian non-EU citizens living and working in the UK, Cyprus, or another overseas location. So it's an interesting proposition, but it is EU law. So at the moment, an expat living and working in in the UK can apply for permanent residency. But again, given that they've been given this grant to stay there indefinitely, I'm not sure that that's needed. But there will be a process at some point, if they don't have that permanent residency, where they will be looking to have a transfer to settled status at some point in the future. Beyond that, renewable residency visa is a citizenship. Now, for certain countries, they do allow dual citizenship. So countries like Ireland, UK, and Cyprus, along with many other European countries, they do allow dual citizenship. And therefore, if you have got an Irish ancestry, for example, from parents or grandparents, it's possible for you to apply for your Irish passport. This will give you citizenship of the EU, and an EU passport will allow you to freely travel around the EU. You might not need that now, but your children might need it in 5, 10 years if the rules change radically. if barriers go up, so that like you're having Australia or Canada or America, where you have financial or skill barriers that stop people having the free movement between countries, if that starts within the EU, then having a dual citizenship could be quite an attractive proposition. If not making your life a bit simpler today, then it could make your children and your grandchildren's life a lot simpler. For the UK, you can acquire the citizenship after 5 years. In Cyprus, it's 7 years, unless you've got a relative, parent, grandparent, or spouse who's Cypriot. But for a country like Spain, you have to be in the country for 10 years. But again, that 10 years starts from the day that you move to Cyprus. Even if you move to Spain on the 1st of March 2019, you've got the right to stay and get a permanent residence. A British person after Brexit can still have a permanent residency in Spain or Cyprus or another EU country. And then once they've been there for 10 years, the permanent residency becomes a stepping stone to citizenship. And then in countries like Cyprus, you've also got citizenship by investment. So if you want to fast track the whole process, even outside Brexit, if you've got more than 2 million to invest, by buying property or business property business in Cyprus, investing in that long-term, you can acquire a fast-track Cypriot passport and citizenship, which will give you freedom and access to living and working within the EU. So, for example, if you're a British company and you want to have continued access for your services, I'm not talking about moving a manufacturing plant necessarily, or a skilled workforce, so you could do that. But if you're a service-based company that could have a Cypriot business, if by investing over €2.5 million in Cyprus, including having a home here, then you could acquire an EU citizenship that would give you and your business continued access to the EU for your goods and services for as long as you wish beyond that. So the world is getting quite, globalization is a real feature of the world. We are seeing some changes around the world with Brexit, with Trump, with North Korea, marching in the Winter Olympics with South Korea. Who knows what the future holds? But what we do know is that people from poor countries aspire to move to richer countries. People like to travel, to track down their ancestors, to live in a warmer country, to live in a mountainous country, to live with their family and friends. All these are reasons for people to live and work abroad. And following EU Brexit, here are 5 options that the EU expats living in the UK and the UK expats living in Cyprus could consider. First of all, you could consider permanent residency. The permanent residency, if you've got your 5 years qualification, gives you the option of remaining in the country indefinitely without the requirement of a renewable residency visa every 1 or 2 years. You could also consider the dual citizenship approach. Making an application for a Cyprus passport now, because you've lived here more than 7 years, is a very effective way of keeping your base in Cyprus for your business, for your work, for your family to continue to enjoy the holiday home that you've got out here. You can also get the EU passport by investment. I think this is a very exciting option if you've got the cash. But if you've got a business that or the wealth to invest $2.5 million in Cyprus property and business, then you can acquire a dual citizenship with Cyprus within 6 months. This means you keep your British or your Irish or your Russian passport, but you get an EU passport for Cyprus as well. And this, you have to buy a home here, and you have to buy a property. You know, we've got some private sale properties which we can show you. And you have to invest 2.5 million in total, including the property, in a Cyprus business. But you know, once you've created that company, you've created that wealth within the company. It's not like this, the United States. You don't have to prove that you've employed people. So, you know, as far as I can see, you could be running it as a holding company for your operations elsewhere. So there's all sorts of possibilities if you want to open your company in the UK to having opportunities to invest and have free access to the EU post the Brexit date. If none of the above apply, you could still got till the 29th of March to move to the EU country that you want to live in. So for EU citizens can move to the UK before the 29th of March and start their 5-year count if that's the life that they want to choose. And British people wanting to live and work in Spain or Portugal or Cyprus could relocate before the 29th of March, get their residency permit, and again start the process towards permanent residency or citizenship. And those options will remain available and are set in stone. There will be local variations, as there are now, and that can be a bit of a minefield. But all those options are available. The other caveat that we would say is that common reporting standards has come in over the last couple of years, and your banks now not just ask you for your passport or your ID and proof of where you're living, but they're also asking you now for your tax number, because your country, your bank and your investment, your savings company are sharing information with the country where they're based. So if you've got a UK bank account, they share that information with the UK tax people at the HMRC. If you've got a Cyprus bank account, it's shared with the Cyprus tax office. But then that Cyprus tax office will share it to the UK if it's a British citizen, and the UK will share the information to Cyprus if the savings account information that they've received from the UK bank or the UK rental agent has got it's got a Cyprus residential address. So information is being shared through. This comes for contractors and people working abroad. What is your residency and where is your residency? And if you haven't got a tax residency, you can be non-resident to the UK and you won't have a tax liability, but there's going to be an uncomfortable question in the future, like there is for Apple and Facebook, about whether you are entitled to remain not paying tax anywhere. If your domicile is the UK, then they could well change the law to require you to pay your tax there. Some very good rules in Cyprus for expats that are working as on service companies or contractors around the world, can live and work and can be based as a tax resident in Cyprus and pay little or no tax as non-domiciled tax residents. Pay no tax on dividends or on savings or on income earned overseas. So those are very good options for people. That's the roundup. I would just say that we've got a Living and Working Abroad Club launch. If you follow the links within this Facebook group and go to our page, and members of the club have got access to detailed webinars with lots of information and advice, where we get down to the nitty-gritty and we look at the details of what's required for which application, and we'll do small group sessions where people can discuss their circumstances and what they're needed. And they get access to guides and a monthly magazine. It's about the lifestyle, it's about the aspiration of living abroad, owning property, managing overseas property rental company, business, and working cross-border, and what their challenges and how the family can be protected from healthcare issues, social insurance, pension issues, state pension, how to protect those rights, and how to look after the family if something goes wrong. You know, people have accidents, people get ill, divorce happens, children grow up. What are the options then, and what is the way forward? And those are the things that we cover from a lifestyle perspective within living and working abroad. And it's a good club, and I hope you can join us, and I hope you can get access to some of the things that we offer within that. So click on the link and follow that and join us, and you get access to the newsletters, the monthly magazine, the guides and the webinars, and find out more about living and working abroad in the future. I thank you for listening, every one of you. I did say I was going to do questions at the beginning, but I'm not going to do that today. Thank you. If you put your question on the page below this video, we will answer them in straight away and over the next day or two. We'd love to correspond for you. Give us your question, and we will love to feature your question in a future webinar with our Living and Working Abroad Club. Thank you. Good night.